and therefore the top range of motion is mostly tricep, so it's not as important. I think that you should still be doing the full range of motion, but if you have to skip out on a certain part, I would recommend skipping out on that final lockout portion and really emphasizing that bottom range. I see too many guys cutting off their range of motion way too short, so they're like going from here to here. Well, guess what? You're not really working the shoulders at that point. That's more of a tricep lift more than anything, and a bad one at that. Today's episode is going to be all about what I deem to be the very, very best, in particular side delt, but also front delt exercises to perform in the gym if your goal is maximum growth, so maximum hypertrophy. We're going to be starting with 3 sets of a seated shoulder press variation, followed by 3 sets of a lateral raise variation. And along the way, I will be discussing why I think that they're so great, some variations you may be able to consider, as well as what makes them great. You know, what is the fundamental science behind why these exercises are so great for building the deltoids? So let's get into it. A shoulder press variation is a great exercise to start with on your shoulder days because it is a compound movement. And what I mean by that is it's using 2 joints. You're using both the shoulder joint for some shoulder abduction, which is the primary function of the side deltoid. And there's a little bit of flexion in there, of course, because you're raising the arm, and that'll also be working the front deltoid head. But you're also doing some elbow extension, which is going to work the triceps as well. And whenever you're doing a compound lift, since it requires more muscle groups, you can automatically load it up more and be able to do more weight. So I think that it's a great exercise because it lends itself so well to progressive overload. In this sense, you can really overload it and track progress over time while being able to overload the deltoids in just the way that you want. And something to keep in mind on this lift is that depending on where you're pressing from, like the pressing angle, it's going to shift the emphasis of which deltoid head you're using. So the further back that you're going, the more side deltoid that you will get, and the further in your elbows, the more front deltoid, just because of the line of contraction and how you're actually pushing the weight up. Versus if you're all the way back, then that's going to get less and less front deltoid and more of the side deltoid here. So that's just something to keep in mind. You see some people doing like behind the neck presses and stuff. A lot of people claim that it causes impingement. I think that if it doesn't cause you any pains or problems, then give it a go, because if anything, that's just going to hit the side deltoid even more, which can be great for some people. But I really encourage people to play around. And in this particular variation, I'm using a cable machine. And since the cable is pulling from behind me back here, I'm actually getting a nice line of pull. So it's actually kind of pulling on the back, and I'm kind of getting like the best of both worlds here. I really want to drive home the idea that it doesn't have to be this specific free motion machine that I'm using. You don't have to do a cable shoulder press. You just want to follow some very specific principles in order to get the most out of your compound lift of the shoulder press. And that is that you probably want to be very stable. I'm really choosing this because I'm so locked into place. Since I can sit down, it's removing the core, the low back, all that good stuff in there from the movement. Like if you were doing a standing military press or something, for example, you're going to have to stabilize with your spine, prevent your thoracic and lumbar spines from actually moving too much under the weight or else you'll hurt yourself. And on top of that, you're tempted to use leg drive the whole time since you are standing on your feet. This creates more of an athletic movement, but in terms of hypertrophy, we don't need to be athletic. What we want is maximum tension and loadability upon the muscles. By being in a chair of some sort and then pressing the weight, you have much more stability and you can just focus on the deltoids, which is what we're trying to focus on. And of course, a little tricep in there too. So what are some valid variations that you may be considering? Well, you could do like a seated machine shoulder press. You could do seated dumbbell shoulder press. You could do a seated cable shoulder press like I'm doing here. And I love the cable variation because it's providing constant tension. And at the top, I can really get that full extension and touch my hands together. Versus a dumbbell, of course, you have that added layer of the two rubber sides, so you can't get all the way in, but that's not a huge deal. That's kind of like pennies over the dollar type of deal. The only thing that I may shy away from is a barbell press, but I still think that a barbell press is a fantastic lift. It's a classic for a reason, you know? So if you want to do a barbell, that's totally fine, except with a barbell, you don't have as much free range of motion. And you got to remember that the shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint, meaning it can move in every which plane. So it's very, very mobile. So if you're constricting it to a certain range of motion, like that's very fixed, then it may kind of retaliate at you, but that's not really for me to say. I mean, everybody's body is different. So I encourage you guys to play around with it. What I'm trying to say is that as long as you're checking off certain boxes, as long as you're confined within certain parameters, then you're going to have a great, great lift. I'm sure that you will notice that I'm discussing the lateral head of the deltoid a lot more than the frontal or the posterior side of the deltoid. That's for some very good reasons. First of all, whenever you're doing any pressing movement, then you're going to be working the frontal head of the deltoid to a great degree because it's going to be involved in pushing that weight off of you. Same goes for the posterior head of the deltoid, the rear delts, people call it. Whenever you're doing a pulling exercise, especially when your elbows are more up, it's going to give them a great line of contraction as well. So you're going to be working them as well. However, we don't hit the side deltoids very often, and that's why I think that specializing in them is very, very important. I'd say that in terms of priority, in terms of like exercise specific lifts for the given heads of the deltoids, number 1 should be your side deltoids, number 2 posterior, and number 3 anterior, so the front. That's just for the reasons that I mentioned, how they get hit from your pressing and your pulling exercises. And then lastly, I just want to talk about form really quick on this exercise. With this one, I'm just trying to focus on this movement right here. So I'm not wiggling around too much at all. I'm just really focusing in on that. And the most important part of the range of motion is that shoulder abduction. So moving the arm up like this. That's what the deltoid is doing. It's just working here to here, bringing up your shoulder just like that. And therefore, the top range of motion is mostly tricep, so it's not as important. I think that you should still be doing the full range of motion, but if you have to skip out on a certain part, I would recommend skipping out on that final lockout portion and really emphasizing that bottom range. I see too many guys cutting off their range of motion way too short. So they're like going from here to here. Well, guess what? You're not really working the shoulders at that point. That's more of a tricep lift more than anything, and a bad one at that. Just like any other muscle group, I think that it deserves some isolatory work. So something that is a single joint movement where you're just getting to focus in on the individualized muscle group. So for this one, anything where you're abducting the shoulder up like this and not including that elbow flexion is going to be an isolation lift for the side deltoids. Now I'm choosing a cable variation because with a cable machine, you are getting constant tension throughout the whole range of motion. If you were to swap to something like a dumbbell and you're doing it standing like I am now, or seated or whatever, then while you are doing it, at the bottom range of the motion, all that's getting worked is really your forearms to hold on to the weight. Up here, of course, it's working because of gravity, but at the bottom, all you're doing is holding on to it and there's no tension applied to the side deltoids. Well, by doing it bilaterally, where I have both cables crossed, I get that full range of motion with constant tension the whole time. The only way that I think that you could improve this lift is you could try facing the other way, which when you're stretched out like this, and this is actually, when you're like this, then you're actually getting more of a stretch placed upon the side deltoid, which is a little bit better. Also, leaning is a great variation too, because you also get a stretch. I like doing it behind the back, and that's what I'm doing for today, not only because it's a better camera angle for you guys, but also because by doing behind the back, you kind of get the lateral deltoid head in a better position to be using its force and using contraction when you're bringing the weight up. So it's having a little bit of better leverages, but that's kind of like tomatoes. You could pick whichever one you really want. But I think that we could really improve this lift by doing it seated. However, I know that's a pain in the neck in order to set up. So if you guys can set that up, and I would encourage you to do so, that would be a fantastic exercise. However, I'm doing it standing because I think that it's suitable for my needs at the moment. In terms of proper form on this lift, I think that what you really want to be doing is not involving your elbows at all. It's kind of along the same lines as with the shoulder press that I was talking about. No elbow flexion or extension at all. Whichever elbow angle that you decide to pick, try and stick with that for the full duration of the set and just key into the side deltoid. It is an isolation lift, so you want to be sticking to a pretty rigid form with it. Then on top of that, if you rotate your pinkies up a little bit, then it's going to give the side deltoid better leverage to be working. So that's something that you could take into account as well. I'm gonna give you guys a little bonus form tidbit for you, and that's that when you are raising up your arms, be careful not to shrug the weight up. The muscles, the upper trap in the deltoid musculature is so interlinked. It's very hard to not shrug while you're doing a side lateral or even a press of any sort as well. It's all connected to it's all the shoulder girdle, so to speak. So when you are doing your lateral raises, just try and keep this shoulder down if you can. I think that I'm totally a victim of this form error. I do it all the time, I'm pretty sure, even if I'm not consciously aware of it. So that's a little bonus form tidbit, but I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. It's been all about the parameters in which constructing a hypertrophic shoulder routine should lie in, and it's kind of, I hope that you guys took something out of it in terms of I can use these parameters in order to find a shoulder press that suits my needs, find a isolation lift, a shoulder fly that suits my needs, and I hope that it does you great service in the future. Have a good one.